Greetings all, Raphael, Dr. Raphael X here with my friend Jeremy to talk on a very interesting topic, the proofs of the soul. We want to revisit this topic because a lot of people have been questioning. In our other videos, we really maybe haven't pinpointed the proofs properly speaking, or we haven't elaborated on them, but we want to do so here and deal with other issues after that. So the proofs of the soul basically, we are our foundation will be the classical philosophers, of course, which classical because they are still relevant today. Right? That's by definitions what classical means. So soul. So we don't have direct experience, so we're material, right? We're using these basic categories: matter, immaterial, not matter. Um, we're not getting into scientific notions of matter, which is actually still in question. I know scientists who deny the reality of matter, philosophers who are immaterialists, but just look at the word immaterialist. We know that indirectly, not directly, like immortal. These are things that we don't know, infinite. We don't know directly but indirectly. So we can know that the soul exists first proof through its effects, right? Through our operations, because the operations, the being, the operations proceed from the being. So the operations reveal what the being is. And look at the operations we have. We have intellection, we have free will, right? Which has no, and now science is trying to incorporate that with whole quantum physics, but it would have to point to an immaterial element that's not subject to the physical laws like matter is. So we have these immaterial operations that we have, the things that we know that are eternal, like definitions of things. Circles change, but the definition of circle or circular things change, but the definition of circular doesn't change. Equal things change. There's no two things that are perfectly equal, but the notion of equal does not change, and they exist perfectly. They're eternal, and we know that they're in us. So this is an operation that reveals the being, eternal, soul, right? Immortal being, immaterial, unchanging, immortal being. And that's another aspect of this conversation, that the soul is immortal, right? Because the soul is pure simplicity, not composed of parts. And this brings to another, and then if you want to chime in here, Jeremy, in a second, another um, proof of the soul, we can say the fact that we are persons, we are subjects of change, but the subject, as subjects, we do not change. So, for example, I am myself at 5 years old, 50 years old, 60 years old, but materially speaking, bodily speaking, there has been, a whole bunch of changes. This is what physics studies, the most basic reality of change that we experience. We know this exists immediately. So, but there has to be something that doesn't change deep down, some ultimate substratum. This is the person. The person is throughout, right? So this is the proof of the soul. What makes you you throughout, all these different types of changes through decades? What makes you subsist as you? It has to be something immaterial, the soul. That's the second proof. And the third proof, I would say, and shortly, briefly rather, that really, there, if we're going to talk about cause and effect, and this is the basis of science, all effects have causes. There can't be an infinite number of material causes in me. Like, what causes my hand to move? You say the bones. What causes that? The nerves, blood cells, all the way down. You can't have an infinite regress of material causes. Now, I don't mean chronologically. I mean in priority. There has to be a first cause that is uncaused in a sense. In us, there has to be this first cause, like the first person who pushes the domino, in the domino effect. All the dominoes are falling thanks to the first one. So this first cause cannot be material itself, or else you would ask, well, what causes that? And that's a legit question. So the soul, and this is where the definition comes, the principle and cause of life. The soul is the first cause, and this first cause has to be immaterial by definition, because again, you cannot have in priority immaterial regress of infinite causes. It's by definition, because matter is limited by definition. So you cannot have this, something limited infinite. It just doesn't make any sense. So if we're referring to a first cause, then this first cause would have to be immaterial ultimately as a third proof. But if you want to chime in here, Jeremy, I know we were talking a lot about this. We didn't really expand or again make it as clear as we want to do in this video until we get to the next topic. But yeah, go ahead if you want to chime in here. I know you have a lot to say on this topic.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we could kind of pick up from last time, right? If we're sunk in the movement of thought associated with the name of Descartes, for example, which would have body be one thing and mind be another thing, then the question of whether or not uh, uh, there is any element, constituent element of the individual that is other than body becomes a really tricky question. And indeed, if we start with the assumption that um, uh, the world as described by equations, right, by modern physics is reality, then we cannot really find room for uh, some kind of what would then be mystical or magical element that would somehow intercede and come in, right? And I feel that's how people typically think of that which would be associated with the term that you used. Here I am. I know for sure that I have a brain or that I am a brain and I am my body. And whether or not there's some sort of mist or some sort of vapor, I something like that that is somehow tied in with my anatomy. That's a question. Maybe it leaves me after I die. Right? Maybe it has a weight, something like this. So we can kind of turn things around a little bit and say that any and all phenomena must be thought of on the same footing of knowledge. I, in in physics, there's a distinction between primary and secondary qualities. Purportedly, primary qualities are that which are those qualities which inhere in reality out there, right? For example, size, shape, number, and secondary qualities are mental. For example, color, taste, smell, and so forth. So this was a split made centuries ago, and it's a split that forms the foundation, the philosophical foundation of contemporary, for example, physics and naturalism, to so call it, right? Meaning certain qualities are mental and certain qualities are physical. But as has been said no few amount of times, there's not really any grounds for such a split. I uh, I look at a red square. The red is mental, but the squareness is physical, and somehow they collide together. It's such a hodgepodge, and it's so um, vague and confusing. Instead, we say any and all qualities that exist, anything that exists can be thought of in the same way, right? Whether it's a feeling, whether it's a color, whether it's size, whether it's shape, whether it's number, whatever the case might be. Now, if such is so, then it follows that I can ask myself to whom does that content appear? Can it be thought of as existing on its own? Right? Can a color exist to its own self? Can a shape or size or emotion exist to its own self? Seemingly not. Right? It exists to a subject. Uh, and who is that subject? Well, it's me in my essentiality. I am that subject. Right? I'm a universal. I'm a principle capable of sentience and thought and such. Right? And to me, content such as can be considered in different ways appears. Just like in a dream, I fall asleep and I dream things from the first person, excuse me, point of view of some other person, right? Everything in the dream comes to me as a subject, both my body in the dream and the sky in the dream and the earth in all of that. By no means are we suggesting that life is a dream, then the word dream would have no meaning, but it's just to highlight the epistemology of the matter. All of it exists in the same way to the subject. Now, if that is so, then there certainly does seem to be room to posit the reality of the subject, right, which can never, on principle, be threatened by the phenomenal world. And further, then the question of individuality. Right? in principles of individuality becomes an empirical question. It is a fact that each person starts off as a baby and then may or may not develop further and develop psychologically, mentally, emotionally, and such. That's simply a fact. And that then could mean what, use the word soul. We can mean that by soul if we want. And it simply becomes a fact of observation. There need not be any positing, nor is there room to posit any, again, vapors or mists or anything that's invisible or anything like that. It is a matter of observation. The fact is, there are individualities and they develop in connection with our efforts and our experiences and our thought and so forth.